Ethiopia has declared a 6-month-long state of emergency across the whole country following months of anti-government protests. Rights groups say more than 500 people have died in the unrest. The government disputes this figure. In a televised address, Ethiopian Prime Minister Hailemariam Desalegn said the measure had been taken to protect citizens. The cause of this is that anti-peace forces, in collaboration with foreign enemies of the country, are making organised attempts to destabilise our country, to disrupt its peace, and also to undermine the existence and security of our people. Residents in the capital Addis Ababa are divided over whether a state of emergency will help the situation. The state of emergency won't work, said this man. It may serve as a temporary fix, but it won't bring a lasting solution. In my opinion, the government is late to declare the state of emergency. If the government had taken this action earlier, the recent destruction that happened across the country wouldn't have happened. The violence has cast a shadow over a nation where a state-led industrial drive has created one of Africa's fastest-growing economies. In the most recent unrest, at least 55 people were killed in a stampede triggered by clashes between police and demonstrators at an annual festival. The violence is being fueled by two of the country's largest ethnic groups who complain that power in Ethiopia is held by a minority elite.
It's calm on the streets of Ethiopia's capital, Addis Ababa, but the country is slipping into a deeper political crisis. On Friday, the government imposed a state of emergency to stem a wave of unrest. The defense minister confirmed on Saturday it will last for 6 months and includes a ban on protests, gatherings, and publications that incite violence.
The state of emergency should not be seen as a military coup. The army is under the federal constitution, and it is a tool to implement the government's decisions. The state of emergency procedures are intended to protect the constitution, country, and people.
The announcement follows the sudden resignation of Prime Minister Hailemariam Desalegn, who had been in office since 2012. Hailemariam said his departure as Prime Minister and chairman of the ruling Ethiopia's People's Revolutionary Democratic Front coalition was to enable necessary reforms in government. There have been mass demonstrations in Ethiopia's largest regions, Oromia and Amhara, in recent months, with protesters calling for political and economic reforms and an end to state corruption. A 10-month state of emergency ended last year but failed to stop the protests, particularly by Ethiopia's youth, who have increasingly come to view demonstrations as the only way to bring about meaningful change. Dozens of protesters have been killed and many more injured since 2015. Eskinder Nega is one of 6,000 political prisoners released by the government this year in an effort to ease growing tensions.
Ethiopia is one large prison. I say this because there is no democracy in the country. This is a dictatorship. We have to change this big prison into a democratic state.
Opposition leaders say Ethiopia's ruling coalition has lost its authority. They are demanding all parties be involved in deciding the country's future.
Real negotiation. You know, this country is a country of 100 million. It is too big for one political group, you know, for one group, small group to run the affairs of 100 million people.
Years of unaccountability and ethnicization of the country's politics have pushed Ethiopia to tipping point. Some say injustice, repression, and lack of meaningful democracy have instilled a sense of despondency. Ethiopia's ruling coalition, the EPRDF, is expected to meet within days to choose a successor to Hailemariam Desalegn. But the stakes are high and jostling for the premiership intense. Whatever the coalition decides will have a huge impact on how Ethiopia is governed. Mohamed Ado, Al Jazeera.
The Ethiopian government is bracing for battle. Addis Ababa has declared a nationwide state of emergency for at least 6 months.
It will be presented to the House of People's Representatives within 48 hours and enacted. However, the implementation of the declaration will start today onwards from the time it was declared by the Council of Ministers.
The decision comes hours after Prime Minister Abiy Ahmed called on residents to take up arms against the TPLF, the Tigray People's Liberation Front, Rebels announced important territorial gains in the last days. Despite repeated denials from the government, the strategic towns of Dessie and Kombolcha in the Amara region have fallen, just 400 kilometers away from the capital Addis Ababa.
If achieving our objectives in Tigray requires that we march to Addis Ababa, we will. But we are not saying we are marching to Addis Ababa.
Government troops and Tigray rebels have been fighting since November 2020 in the north of the country. Thousands of civilians have been killed during that time. The humanitarian crisis in the north of Ethiopia is disastrous. Over 2.5 million people have been displaced. According to the World Food Organization, over 5 million people in the Tigray region are in urgent need of help.